Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 171, The Founder of Moama. Part 2. In this episode, I'll be covering James Maiden's family. James Maiden's wife, Jane, died on the 2nd of October 1891 in South Yarra, Victoria, aged 76. And their children, the firstborn was George Maiden, who was born in 1842 in Moama. He married Mary Butters Edwards in Sydney in 1864 when he was 23 and Mary 21, and they had 7 children. On the 5th of January 1855, it mentions an article saying wonderful escape. A very serious accident occurred on Christmas Day last to Mr. James Maiden's eldest son, who only returned home the day previously from one of the schools adjoining Melbourne to spend the Christmas with his parents. The little boy had just crossed the Murray to the Victoria side, and while riding a pony, when a hook suspended from one of the trees near the centre of the road caught him by the throat, entered on the left side of the neck and coming out just behind the left ear, but not fortunately injuring any of the important vessels in its progress. The youth was suspended for a moment by the neck and had the presence of mind to lift himself by seizing the chain and actually unhooking himself when he dropped to the ground. He is doing well. The hook and chain were used by the puntman to hang his meat upon, and singular enough, he was on several occasions cautioned by Mr. Maiden Sr. in respect to the dangerous position in which the hook was suspended. And on the 17th of March 1893, it says Mr. George Maiden, who for the past 18 months has held the position of Acting General Manager to Goldsborough Morton Company Limited, and is now about to resume management of the Sydney business of that institution. I did an episode on the Mort family on bonus episode 20 that covers them in a lot more detail if you're interested. Mr. Maiden was presented by the officers and employees of the head office with a handsome gold watch and chain as a token of the esteem and respect in which he is held by those over whom he has ruled during his term in Melbourne. Mr. Ray feelingly reflected the complete manner in which Mr. Maiden ingratiated himself with all whom his business had brought him in contact, and the way in which those under him had been won by his fair and manly treatment of all, from the highest to the lowest, by his business-like methods and devotion to the interests of the big concern over which he ruled. He indicated Mr. Maiden's career as a fine pattern for the young members of the staff to follow, and spoke of his services to the company in very flattering terms. Mr. Rowe concluded that Mr. Maiden would take away with him the warm good wishes of every man and boy connected with the company, brought forth a respective echo and hearty rounds of applause. Mr. R. Johnston spoke also. He'd known Mr. Maiden for over 36 years, first as a sturdy youth with overflowing energy and strong willpower, who with a stout heart and clear head was better equipped for life's battle than by the mere possession of hereditary wealth, and with those gifts of nature he'd come successfully out of the contest and gained the object of his ambition in a high and honourable position he held. Mr. Maiden rose to respond, and his reception must have been deeply gratifying, and he gave unmistakable evidence of his feeling and appreciation of the motives that had suggested the presentation. Apparently he had not anticipated that his staff could have so clearly perceived, through the strict conduct imposed on one fulfilling the duties of his difficult office, the qualities which had called forth the sentiments expressed so kindly and testified to by the handsome souvenir. He spoke of the responsibility which he had felt rested on him in his pilotage of such a vast concern through the troubled waters of the most trying season Victoria had experienced, and referred with gratified confidence to the company's battle with the times, which had brought so many to shipwreck. He anticipated for the staff in their connection with his successor a continuance of those pleasant relations which the present ceremony pointed to the existence of in the past. They might rely that this new appointment was the result of full and careful consideration by the directors, and there could be no doubt that the outcome would be satisfactory for all interested. Mr. Maiden spoke with pleasant recollection of his earliest association with the firm when he was a mere boy 36 years ago, and he served it for 10 shillings a week. He felt it was the proudest moment of his life that, having come from a humble start, he reached the highest position in the service to which he had been offered the permanent appointment. He had earned not only the approval of those who had placed him there, of which his position gave the assurance,
but also the confidence and goodwill of those associated with him in his labours, of which their handsome present would be to him a lasting and intensely gratifying token. For many reasons he regretted leaving those who surrounded him, but he felt compelled to decline the offer made to him to remain here permanently in order to return to Sydney and again take up the reins of a business from long association he was deeply interested in and identified with. Then, too, strong family ties added their claim, and long and careful consideration had led him to the stop which culminated in the present demonstration of their goodwill, which would forever remain prominent among his most happy memories. The ceremony was an enthusiastic one, and the expressions of mutual goodwill and confidence just as should characterise the relations of a body of men working for a common cause. We hear that a reception awaits Mr. Maiden on his return to Sydney, and that will be with warmth and good feeling in connection with his leave-taking from Melbourne. And George Maiden died in September 1905 in Willoughby, New South Wales, at the age of 64, and his death was outlined in the paper. Death of Mr. George Maiden. A wide circle of friends will hear with regret of the death of Mr. George Maiden, manager of Goldsborough Morton Company Limited, who died in his residence in Sydney Road, Willoughby. A man of broad sympathies and of kindly approachable disposition, Mr. Maiden was not only one of the most popular figures in the commercial life of the city, but a man on the land who knew him for a friend. He was the founder of the fund which a year or two ago was established in order to relieve settlers who had suffered from the effects of the disastrous bushfires, and this was only one of the many philanthropic efforts in which he was from time to time actively concerned. He took a keen interest in sport and was one of the promoters of the Old Sydney Rugby Football Club. Mr. Maiden came from a squatting family near the Murray River, and in his early days his love of adventure persuaded him into undertaking a long series of droving expeditions. In this way he got to know the country, and it was said of him that he was acquainted with every mile between the north of Queensland and the south of Victoria. Later he was a station manager for some years. Afterwards he came to Sydney and bore an important part in building up the firm of Maiden, Hill and Clark, which subsequently became Hill, Clark and Company. He afterwards became associated with the late Mr. Richard Goldsborough and took over the management of the Sydney office of R. Goldsborough and Company Limited. On the amalgamation of the firms of Goldsborough and Company and Morton Company, he was appointed to the Sydney board of the company, and eventually he was the acting general manager in Melbourne. About 12 years since, he took over the control of the Sydney office. Mr. Maiden, who is 64, leaves a widow, 6 sons and 3 daughters, the eldest son, George Jr., being the head of the firm of Maiden Brothers. And another article on his death says that there will be universal regret to all graziers in Australia knowing the death of Mr. George Maiden, and also to those who came into contact with him socially or in other than withstanding his arduous duties. He found time to interest himself in many matters that had for their subject the advancement of the state. He was prominent and active in philanthropic work, acting as the chairman of committees appointed to distribute distress funds. He was also one of the foremost figures of the committee charged with the dispensing of funds collected for the sufferers of the last drought. His illness commenced about 14 years ago. He was a man whom to know was to like and to respect. Mr. Maiden was a king amongst auctioneers. Directly he mounted the rostrum and he controlled his audience as no other auctioneer I have known did. Many purchasers have told me how they were led into giving higher prices than they intended for sheep simply because George Maiden's persuasive eloquence made them forget their caution. But they also knew that in overstepping the limit they had straight run for their money. There were no bogus bids for sheep as far as Mr. Maiden was concerned. Of late years his son George took up the running of the assignment that he'd been disposed of, but whenever the pens of noted breeders were put up to auction, the father again took affairs in hand. On Saturday he was seized with a paralytic stroke, and despite all medical skill, he passed away in the same evening. And another description of the man upon his death: his character as a man was almost without blemish. His kindly feeling for his fellow man was unbounded. His life, to my personal knowledge, has been passed in doing good to all around him. A real true friend was George Maiden. I first met him on the Mudgee Road in the old coaching days in 1872. He was travelling with the late George Roos of Mudgee, and as I was a new chum in travelling and the weather was fearfully cold, he gave me a wrinkle or two as an old overlander, as he described himself. We were friends ever after, and later I was a neighbour of his at Marrickville, and many a pleasant hour we spent together discussing the welfare of the country. The last time I met him was at North Sydney. I just got off the steamer and was making for the tram when he rushed after me and said, "I'll miss my steamer, but I'd miss 50 bloomin' steamers before I'd miss the chance, old fellow, of having to handshake with you." Well, I think he missed 2 steamers before we had our yabba over. I know I missed more than 2 trams and an appointment at Mossman that same day. Firm of words, speaking of deeds, and deedless in his tongue. Not soon provoked, nor being provoked, soon calmed. His heart and hand both open and free. Such was George Maiden, peace be with him. Renoco. James and Jane Maiden's second child was Mary. She was born in 1844 in Moama. Mary married John Sutcliffe Horsfall in Melbourne on the 19th of August 1862 when she was 19 and John 26. They had 6 children. Mary died on the 15th of February 1915 at the age of 71. John Sutcliffe Horsfall was a wool broker and a pastoralist, and he'd been born in Yorkshire, England. He was educated in Bradford and worked in the family woolen mills. Discontented, he migrated to Victoria in June 1856, and in 1857 he joined the firm Richard Goldsborough as a travelling representative, and in 1864 was given a share of the profits as well as a £1,000 salary. In 1873 he became a partner. He extended the business and built up a large personal following. In 1877 he became director of the Australian Agency and Banking Corporation Limited, which in 1881 merged with Goldsborough & Co. In 1888 the firm amalgamated with Morton Co. of Sydney to form Goldsborough Morton Company Limited. Horsfall remained a director and was on the local committee of management. His first pastoral investment was Ensay in Gippsland. In the drought of the late 1880s, he acquired Widgewa, Momalong and Carrabury in the Riverina, financed by Goldsborough Morton Company. When he resigned in 1889, a committee of shareholders exonerated him from a charge of embezzling £25. He and Andrew Rowan accused the other of improperly taking large advances from the company. In 1890, Rowan sued Horsfall for £25,000 damages for libel. The next year, the case went to arbitration and Rowan was awarded £50, but costs were shared. In 1892, Horsfall became a pastoral advisor to the New Zealand Loan and Mercantile Agency. About 1894, he returned to Goldsborough Morton Company as a pastoral advisor. His secret price was a £10,000 advance to his son-in-law, Rupert Carrington, and in 1904 his agreement with the firm was not renewed. He was vice president of the New South Wales Sheepbreeders Association, and between 1909 and 1912 he sold all of his stations except Carrabury. In 1912 to 1916, Horsfall reluctantly gave £10,000 for a chapel in memory of his daughter Edith at Trinity College in the University of Melbourne after Dr. Alexander Leaper had accepted his unmatriculated nephew. Horsfall visited England at least once and New Zealand many times. He equipped and sent 200 bushmen to the Boer War. His great pleasure was boating, and he kept a small fleet at Widgewa. He died on the 11th of June 1916 at Toorak, and him and Mary had a son and several daughters. He married again after Mary's death to Agnes Mahoney, and his daughters and his son Richard inherited nearly £115,000. So it's quite likely that Mary met John through her brother and his association with the Goldsborough Morton Company. James and Jane's third child was Richard. He was born in 1845 in Moama, and he married Isabella Oliver in 1875. He died on the 21st of June 1875 in Albury, and the death was outlined in the paper, Death of the son of the late Mr. James Maiden. It is with much regret that we record the obituary of Mr. Richard Maiden, a gentleman long and favourably known as the confidential superintendent of Goldsborough Company on the Bungle Station. The deceased gentleman was the second son of the well-known and esteemed Mr. Maiden of Maiden's Punt, Moama, and was only in his 29th year of age. He reached Albury on the 15th and died on the 21st of an aneurysm in the abdomen. It is only a few days since he went down to Melbourne in the meridian of life, full of bright hopes and brilliant prospects, and was married. Yesterday, after a lapse of 19 days of wedded life, he left a bereaved widow to mourn his loss. His kindliness of manner and gentleness endeared him to all his acquaintances, many of whom followed his remains to the Albury Cemetery. Much sympathy is expressed for the bereaved widow. On the 11th of September 1875, regarding Richard Maiden deceased, Mr. Webb moved for a rule nisi to revoke probate and called upon Mr. Alison Torrance to prove the will. Charles Wallace, one of the executors, went with the deceased to a hotel in the Albury district on the 5th of June and remained there with Maiden until he died on the 21st of June. Torrance was called in as an attesting witness to what he believed to be a will, but the witnesses did not sign in presence of each other. The rule was moved on behalf of Mrs. Jane Maiden of South Yarra and other relatives and was granted. James and Jane's fourth child was Hannah Martha, who was born in 1847 at Moama, and Hannah married Bryce Alexander Blair in 1878 in Victoria when she was 30 and Alexander 32. They had a daughter, Elsie Maiden Blair, in 1881 in Melbourne, but Elsie died in July 1918, aged just 37, and she didn't marry. Hannah died in October 1915 at the age of 67. Fifth child, Jane Maiden, was born on the 22nd of February 1850 in Moama. She married Horace John Genvey in Melbourne on the 26th of February 1875. Horace was English and came with his family to Australia in 1855. He was a solicitor's clerk at the time of their marriage. They had 4 children, but only one survived infancy, Horace William Walter, born in January 1876. Horace was a grazier and lived in Maitland, where he married Kathleen Raymond Wolfe in 1916 when he was 40 and Kathleen 30, and they had 4 children. Horace Jr. died in 1959 in Cronulla, New South Wales, aged 59. Jane and Horace actually separated on the 26th of February 1883. Horace lived with his father in March 1884 to attend school, and he initially spent holidays with his mother, but there was a case as he had not returned to her. So on the 27th of August 1887, the Melbourne Leader, a strange divorce suit in Sydney. In the divorce court today, the case heard of John Guthrie Gray versus Ellen Maria Gray being the husband's petition on the grounds of his wife's adultery with 3 co-respondents. The petitioner in 1875 became acquainted in Melbourne with the respondent, who was then a barmaid 18 years of age. He proposed and was accepted, and having put her to school for a time, he married her in Albury in January of the following year. After living at St Kilda, they went to a station which he had purchased near Corowa. 3 children were born, and in 1876 Mrs Gray confessed that she had been plied with champagne by James Neal, bookkeeper on the station, and he had taken advantage of her in an intoxicated condition. For the sake of the children, the petitioner took no further steps than to send Neal away. Mrs Gray afterwards had Neal taken back on the plea that he might talk in the townships. Improper relations resumed, and Neal, being sent to a more distant station, was killed by a fall from his horse. Another bookkeeper named Horace John Genvey took his place, and a number of men on the station threatened to lynch Genvey, having found him with Mrs Gray sitting on his knee in Mr Gray's absence from home. The next day, Gray and Genvey fought to a finish. The petitioner next took a house for his wife at Brighton Beach, leaving her with servants and every comfort. Finding Genvey was again visiting her, he stopped her credit until she could show signs of reformation. Mrs Gray and Genvey then left for Sydney. The petitioner, at her request, met her in Albury just before Christmas 1891 and took her back to live with him on the station. After 2 years, she began to drink again and complained of the climate being too hot. Thereupon he took her to several places for her health and at length to Geelong, where she became intimate with a man named John Smith, who cleaned boots in the house where they stayed. Subsequently, the petitioner found his wife and a visitor named Thomas Ditchfield in a bedroom, and shortly afterwards the petitioner instituted divorce proceedings. The respondent now resides with her relatives at St Kilda. Mrs Griffith, boarding housekeeper of Burke Street, Sydney, deposed that Mr and Mrs Genvey lived at her house for 2 months as man and wife, but hearing that the lady really was Mrs Gray, and having identified her by a photograph, she gave them notice to leave. His Honour granted a rule nisi for divorce with costs against both Genvey and Ditchfield, who were made co-respondents in the case. Horace then commenced a relationship with Catherine Vosti and had 3 children with her in 1888, 1890 and 1892. One child, Madge Vosti, survived infancy. Catherine was 16 years younger than Horace, and Catherine then went on to marry Matthew Vallance at Pyramid Hill in Victoria in March 1899. Madge was born Madge Genvey Vosti at the Melbourne Women's Hospital on the 22nd of October 1892. Her father was not listed, and she was received as a ward of the state. Her particulars said Madge Genvey Vosti, aged 4, received on the 20th of August 1896, illegitimate, mother Catherine Vosti, a domestic servant, has contributed to the support of a mother and a delicate sister who are unaware of the existence of the child. Madge was looked after by Miss Lydia Woodgate, a dressmaker in Richmond, until the 20th of August 1896. Miss Woodgate then gave Madge up to the care of an institution, Caldonan Homes, which was originally Scots Church Neglected Children's Aid Society in North Melbourne. On the 1st of October 1896, she was taken in view of adoption by Mr. Hill of Orford, Victoria, but was returned to the children's home on the 18th of March 1897. On the 3rd of April 1897, she was taken in again temporarily by Miss Woodgate, but was again returned to the children's home on the 14th of June 1897. On the 19th of June 1897, at Burrenbeat, Victoria, she was taken in with view of adoption by Mr. Archibald Wilson, but was then transferred to Miss Harriet Warren of Windermere, Victoria, on the 22nd of March 1902. In the inquest of Mary Warren on the 24th of September 1918, Madge gave evidence that she'd been living with the Warren family for 14 years. Madge married Stanley William Carpenter in Ballarat in July 1926. Madge stated on her marriage certificate that her parents were unknown. They had 6 children, 5 surviving infancy, and Madge died in Ballarat in February 1982 at the age of 89. Horace remarried in January 1896 in Melbourne to Frederica Lucina Mitchell when he was 46 and Frederica 45, and Horace died on the 10th of June 1938 in Malvern, Victoria, aged 89. Jane died on the 15th of February 1891 in Malvern, Victoria, aged only 40. And the death notice for Jane says that on the 15th at her residence in Stewart Street, Malvern, Jane Genvie, the wife of Horace John Genvie of Melbourne and youngest daughter of the late James Maiden, formerly of Paracuta Station, New South Wales, in her 41st year. So interesting, with her death, she is still stated as Horace's wife, even though by that stage they'd certainly separated and he'd had 3 children, had a relationship with Catherine Vosti, and also had remarried in that time. The 6th child was James Davis Maiden. He was born in 1852 in Moama. He married Ada Loader in Warrelda, New South Wales on the 12th of June 1879 when he was 27 and Ada 21. They had 8 children. In 1889 they were living at Weewa, New South Wales. By 1908 they were living at Woodbine in Roma, Queensland, where James was working as a drover. James died on the 7th of December 1924 in Roma, aged 72, and his obituary states, "Residents of Roma and District will regret to learn of the death of Mr. James Davis Maiden, which occurred unexpectedly at Kildare, Mount Hutton District on Sunday night. He was widely known throughout the southwest portion of Queensland. He followed the occupation for many years as a drover, and he and his family have resided in the Roma District for many years. Of late years, Mr. Maiden has been engaged in cattle raising at Kildare in the Mount Hutton District. In his young days, Mr. Maiden was a good all-round athlete and particularly fond of a game of cricket and football. He was keenly interested in various racing clubs, and of late years has been an ardent bowler. He had a most cheery and kindly disposition and was highly esteemed by all who knew him. The late Mr. Maiden occupied seats on the Roma Town Council and the Bunga Shire Council. He leaves a widow and a grown-up family of 3 sons, R.G. Maiden of Roma, Alan Maiden of Omeo, Mount Hutton, and Eric Maiden of Corula Park, Surat, and also 4 daughters, Mrs. J.G. Jones of Mount Alfred Station, Wyandra, Mrs. W.A. Bassett of Roma, Mrs. David Ferrier of Roma, and Miss Laurie and Rita Maiden of Kildare. The details of his death said that it occurred suddenly. The deceased had partaken in a hearty meal at tea time, after which it went out onto the veranda and sat down, and it expired almost immediately. Their 7th child was Matthew Maiden, and he was born in 1854 in Moama. It's possible that he was stillborn, as I cannot find any other records other than his birth. In an 1869 death certificate, it did state that he was deceased by that time. So the interesting story of the founder of Moama, his great rise, but also his great fall. But his children did very well for themselves.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.